Hey guys, so I promised that I would share with you the X-ray fluorescence analysis that I did yesterday of the fallout that we had in the UK, which I think pretty well all of the country got onto their vehicles. And lots of talk in mainstream media about it being Sahara sands, and then obviously an awful lot of chit chat on various social media channels about what possibly was in it. So I thought, well, the best thing I could do is actually do some proper analysis on it. So what I did is we actually collected sample, which was then dried, and you can see that in there. It was dried, homogenized, so it's actually a completely liberated particle, so we don't get any cluster effect. And then it was analysed using X-ray fluorescence. I happen to use a thermoscientific Niton FXL, which is one of the best field mobile X-ray fluorescent units on the market, and I use it commercially in geochemical exploration. So this is the baby here, and all the analysis was done yesterday. I did it under 3 modes because I wanted to get full geochemical signatures. So that included me doing it under a soil analysis, which was what I typically do if I was actually going to do some work on soils. And then I ran 2 mining samples as well. Those were to show me the light elements and also the general mine pathfinder elements. So the only thing I didn't do is I didn't have time to do helium purging, which is what I would normally do for light elements. So when I'm talking about some of the rare earth metals, I would normally do a helium purge rather than having it in a normal air mix when I'm actually doing the analysis. But this was effectively, as good as it's going to get in terms of doing analysis on the fly and getting some real semi-qualitative results. So that being said, I've done the results. Now, what I wanted to do was I actually wanted to show people that I was comparing this against real data that was out there. So what I decided to do was trawl academic papers, of which I've published several. And I wanted to find some papers that had given me some comparative geochemical signatures to look for based on the mainstream media narrative that this was Sahara sands. So what I did is I found 2 peer-reviewed papers. One of them was in the Journal of Engineering and Exact Sciences, and that was published on the 20th of August 2023, so it doesn't get much newer than that. And that was a comparative analysis of the microstructural and physiochemical properties of alluvial and dune sands of northeast Algerian Sahara. So that gave me a geochemical signature for a sand dune in the Sahara, using X-ray fluorescence. So using exactly the same instrument as I've got here, that paper was written. So that's one of my comparisons. The second one, which I think is more interesting, is I actually decided to look for a paper about atmospheric dust, because that's what they're referring to when they're talking about Sahara sands. It's just media going, oh, it's Sahara sands. It doesn't actually mean that. It doesn't mean it necessarily came from the Sahara, although we are going to look for the signature. So the second paper that I pulled, slightly older paper, so this was actually published originally. It's available on various channels, but basically this was originally published by the Department of Earth Sciences, Faculty of Sciences, Shiraz University, Iran. And this was published, let me just have a quick look, this was published in 2020. So not that long ago. And this is an assessment of geochemical and sedimentological characteristics of atmospheric dust in Shiraz, southwest Iran. So what that was doing, and there's very few papers on this, what that was doing was actually showing me the geochemical signature of atmospheric dust. Not space dust, atmospheric dust. So that's the second paper. These papers are available online. If you've got an academic subscription, you get them for free. If not, you have to pay for them. So those are the 2 papers that I used as what I call my baseline data. Okay, so hopefully, so far, you're following me. So this is part 1. This is 4 minutes in. So I'm going to break it now, and then I'll come back with part 2, just so people can sort of take this in bite-sized chunks. Hey folks, so this is part 2 of my analysis of what fell on the UK that most people found on their vehicles on the 7th of September 2023. As I said in the previous part of this, that I've used 2 baseline academic peer-reviewed papers to give me some geochemical signatures of what I may be looking for if this was, in fact, Saharan sand, as they suggested in the mainstream media. So I used 2 papers, which I will put the links up. Just grabbing the papers now. So I've got 2 papers, and I'll put the links to those up. One of them was Sahara sand dune geochemical analysis, and the other one was effectively what we call atmospheric dust. So that's not space dust, it's atmospheric dust. And again, I wanted to get a geochemical signature, so I knew what I was looking for. We call it pathfinding. So basically, I'm looking for common elements. I'm not interested in looking at elements that are isolated in what fell in the UK. I can have a whole nother discussion on those because there's some really interesting stuff there. But I wanted comparison with what is already known to be in the geochemical signature of Sahara sand and also atmospheric dust. So that's what I'm focusing on this. I'm not focusing in on the other elements that I found in the fallout in the UK. I will discuss those in another presentation isolated from this. Okay, so just be aware of that. I'm not going to discuss every element that I found. I'm going to discuss something that I can compare with baseline data that already exists. So first and foremost, I was interested in the oxides. Oxides pretty well make up sand. They are the oxide of the elements, so we call them the pseudo elements. I'm not going to go into the whole science. This is all about just giving you the data. So first of all, we're going to compare, and apologise that I'm turning my back on you, but I'm sort of looking at my screen as I'm telling you, and I will put these graphs up as images so you can actually see what I'm seeing. So what I did is I took the sample data and various oxides that had also been measured with regards to the sand dunes of the Sahara, which, going back to it, is Algerian Sahara. So that's what we've used as the data. So interestingly, if we look at silica oxide is by far the biggest component of a sand dune. If you think about it, it's silica, it's sand. So silica oxide, if we're to compare the two, in the sample found in the UK, and this is in parts per million, by the way. Okay, so everything I measure with XRF, I do in parts per million. So parts per million, we've got 594,443 parts per million. So pretty well, majority of it is silica. Okay, so silica oxide. With regards to a sand dune from the Sahara, we've got 809,200. So if you compare the two, you've roughly got 59% of what fell in the UK as a percentage was silica oxide compared to a direct sand dune, which is 80%. So, you know, we're definitely in the right area. And then let's have a look at aluminium oxide. Now you might go, oh, aluminium. Aluminium oxide is naturally found in sands all over the world. Okay, so don't get alarmed that we've got aluminium there. It doesn't mean necessarily somebody's dropping it on our heads. It's just there naturally. So aluminium oxide, when found in a sand dune, we've got 12,300 parts per million. In the UK sample, we've got 37,994. So quite a significant increase in the amount of aluminium oxide found compared to a direct sand dune. That's interesting. And then we go on to iron. Lots and lots of people were saying, it's magnetic. And then there's the whole story about it being graphene and this, that, and the other. Well, one thing I'll mention very quickly about graphene. It's only very recently that scientifically we've been able to make graphene magnetic. It's not naturally a magnetic property of graphene. So to say it's magnetic, therefore it's graphene, is actually wrong. So what we have is we have iron. Why have we got iron? Well, iron is abundant all the way through the earth. So to find it in a sand dune is pretty normal, because what is a sand dune? A sand dune is basically a crystalline microstructure of all the rock and detritus that gathers in these areas, mainly from the bedrock. So we've got iron. So the iron oxide in the sand dune, we've got 11,383. In the fallout in the UK, we've got 54,700. So again, a significant increase in what we're seeing in the UK sample compared to a direct sample taken from a sand dune. Now remember, they're suggesting that this thing went up, across and down again. Yet we have an awful lot more. And then we go on to Calcium oxide. So again, like silica, it's a large part of a crystalline structure of sand. So calcium oxide, again, sand dune, we're looking at 32,509. In the UK, we had 110,000 parts per million of calcium oxide was dropped. And a lot of people were talking about the chalk. It looked chalky. Calcium. So, and then we go on to magnesium. Magnesium oxide, again, magnesium oxide, big part of sand dunes. So magnesium oxide, 11,383 directly from the sand dune. Magnesium is very light, by the way. So magnesium airborne, 3,300 on the fallout. And then quickly, let's go, potassium oxide. Potassium oxide, 40,000 in a sand dune, and we've got 4,000 in the fallout. Again, very light element. So when it goes atmospheric, you know, you get changes. And then we've got titanium oxide. Again, lots of people go, oh, titanium. Again, it's another natural oxide within sand. So if you're looking directly at a sand dune, you're looking at 16,500 ppm. And if you're looking at the sample that fell in the UK, we've got 960, so a lot lower. And then we've got magnesium oxide, very low in the UK sample, we've got 360. In the direct sand dune, we've got 1,796. Chromium, we had chromium oxide in the UK sample at 909 parts per million, which is actually quite high. We had below limit of detection in a sand dune. And then we've got copper oxide, 710 parts per million in the UK sample, none found in the sand dune sample. So that's part 2. When I come back, let's have a look at the elements. Thanks, folks. Hey, folks, so this is part 3 of my analysis of the fallout here in the UK, which was sampled and taken on the 7th of September 2023. All of the analysis was carried out using X-ray fluorescence, and I'm just going through now a baseline comparison with peer-reviewed papers that are already out there on sand dunes from Sahara and also from atmospheric dust from the same area. So effectively from North Africa all the way down through to Middle East and further. So that's what we're doing. I wanted baseline data that was out there, that was quantified, and that's what I've used. So what I'm going to do now is look at the elements. So these are the individual elements rather than the oxides of those. And this time we're going to compare the UK fallout with atmospheric dust collection. Atmospheric dust collection, in this particular case, was actually analysed and collected in Shiraz in Iran. So that region has a lot of problems with atmospheric dust and sandstorms, so that's why I chose it. Very good comparison, and bearing in mind that's a lot closer to where the native sand is compared to the UK, which is in the Northern Hemisphere. So again, let's run through these. So aluminium, again, lots of people go, oh, aluminium. So aluminium, if we look at what we have in atmospheric dust from Iran, we've got 67,200 ppm. If we look at the UK sample, we've got 20,442. That's very high, but it's a natural occurrence. Then we look at calcium. Again, we've got 77,000 parts per million in atmospheric space dust, and what fell in the UK was 104,000 parts per million. So significant increase. And then we go on to magnesium. Magnesium, we had none in the UK fallout, but it's naturally normally in atmospheric dust. So atmospheric dust in Iran, 19,600 parts per million, below limit of detection here in the UK. And then we go potassium. Potassium, we've got 15,000 parts per million in atmospheric dust, and we've got 25,000 parts per million in what fell in the UK. Titanium, we've got very similar results. We've got 5,100 in atmospheric dust, and we've got 7,200 in what fell here in the UK. Arsenic, very interesting. So arsenic, very low in atmospheric dust, 4.5 ppm. However, in the fallout in the UK, we had 44.9 ppm. And then we've got cadmium. Cadmium hardly shows in atmospheric space dust. However, with the sample taken in the UK, we'd got 15.7 actually ppm of cadmium. And then we'll just move along. Cobalt, normally in atmospheric dust, had no cobalt in the UK fallout, below level of detection. Chromium, I mentioned chromium in the oxides. Chromium, again, very interesting anomaly we've got here. 98 parts per million normally in atmospheric dust, yet in the UK sample we've got 454 parts per million. And then we've got and then we start to go into some interesting things. So we've got things like molybdenum. Now, again, molybdenum, 0.79 ppm, so not really a comparison when you look at the very high ppms that we've been talking about. Yet, when we analysed what fell in the UK, we got 14.66 ppm. And then we've got nickel. So nickel, 68 ppm in atmospheric dust and 217 in the sample from the fallout here in the UK. Lead, 30 ppm normally in atmospheric dust, yet what fell in the UK was 114. Now, a lot of that can be put down to local pollution. I live very close to the M6, so that could have been part of the fallout. So I'm not suggesting that they're dropping lead on us. I'm just saying that the lead may be as a result of me being close to cities and also a major highway here in the UK. And then we go into things that are quite interesting. So we start to look at things like strontium and vanadium and zinc. I mean, these are again always found in atmospheric dust. And you might think, oh, really? Yes, they are. Again, numbers, strontium, almost identical. 287 in atmospheric dust, 271 in the UK sample. Vanadium, 102 in atmospheric dust, and 273 here in the UK sample. Zinc, 106 in atmospheric, and then 764 in the UK. Extremely high on the zinc side compared to what should be in atmospheric dust. So, you know, this is all the data. It's all here. I've literally got everything that I did. All samples, by the way, are tested 4 times, and then they're averaged out, and we take a mean from that. So we do the same sample 4 times under each setting, and then we take the average of those. So that's what I've done. So I'm giving you the average rather than the individual readings. So, what's my conclusion? My conclusion is that it's a little bit misleading what they said in the mainstream media. You definitely can't say this was Sahara sand. However, it's very much in the same baseline, and I would say it's very close to a fingerprint of what we know as atmospheric dust from a region which has a large body of sand dunes. So, atmospheric dust, pretty much the same all over the world. I've taken baseline data that is really direct from source. So these are really high elevated numbers, yet what we have here in the UK, we've got certain elements that are much higher than I would expect to see. But it does follow that this was an atmospheric dust. However, and this is the interesting thing, I think inadvertently what happened when all of this stuff just dropped in the UK because of rainfall in the early hours of yesterday morning was that it brought down a lot of other things that maybe shouldn't have been in the atmosphere in the first place and are definitely being put there by some other means. And that's the stuff I really want to go into in another post. But to cover off what the media was saying and what I have found using X-ray fluorescent analysis of the actual sample is that this is very much in line with atmospheric dust. However, there's a lot of things in there that shouldn't be there, which I will discuss in another post. But right now, I just want to compare like for like. So I'm not going to talk about elements that I do not have corresponding data to in published papers. Hopefully that makes sense. So thanks for watching. Hope it's been of interest. I'll put the graphs up so you can see the data yourself. Yeah, vibrations up, live life, and love nature. Thanks, folks. Part 4 of my analysis of what fell in the UK on September the 7th, 2023, and comparing it to actual sand dune material from the Sahara and also from atmospheric dust from Iran, an area called Shiraz. So, what I said I would talk about in part 4 are the things that I found in the sample that I didn't have comparative data from the 2 peer-reviewed papers that I used as my baseline data for both the sand dune and also for atmospheric dust. So I've got nothing to compare these with. So they're just anomalies to me at this moment in time, but I wanted to share them with you. So there's a few anomalies in there that I wanted to discuss. We've got uranium. So uranium, I've got no baseline data from atmospheric dust, all from Sahara sand geochemical structure to know what normally you would have in terms of uranium. But uranium, we've got 15 parts per million in the UK fallout sample. We've got thorium at 22 parts per million. We've got selenium at 11.46 parts per million. We've got arsenic at 44.91. We've got lead at 6.26. We've got niobium at 22.64. We've got yttrium at 23.33. And we've got bismuth at 26.59. I'm not sure what that data means, in the sense I don't know what to compare it with, but they are certainly questions I would ask as to why they are falling out of our atmosphere here in the UK. And how did they get there in the first place? And then we've got things like, chromium. We know chromium is natural, and I discussed it in the earlier paper, but, 454 parts per million chromium, vanadium, 273 parts per million, galenium, we've got 257 parts per million. It's just interesting. We've got rubidium, 89 parts per million. And it goes on. So this is really interesting. And I do think there's a real point to doing this analysis. And that is, we really are trying to find out what is falling out of the skies all over the world at the moment. How did it get there? Is there a natural occurrence that's taking place? Is it to do with, change in conditions on the planet? Or is it to do with a more sinister approach, and that is that this stuff is being put up there, which we know an awful lot of things are being aerosoled into the skies for various scientific, they call them, projects, or cooling, heating it, reflecting it, deflecting it, whatever you want to do, bouncing signals. The military have been doing it for years. You bounce a signal off a cloud, so you don't need a repeater station anymore. You just find a cloud and you bounce your signal off it and get it somewhere else. So interesting. We don't have any pollutants dropping out with this rain, what I call normal pollutants, which I would expect to see, because an awful lot of what they talk to you about with chemtrails, they go, oh no, it's because of the high sulfur content. I'm sorry, I don't see it. Unless you're using lead petrol, maybe you are. Maybe you've got a lot of lead in it, because, we've got lead, but not a lot. We've got 6 ppm of lead. I'm more interested in these light elements. Why are they there? Especially when a lot of these have got some very, very interesting bimetal relationships with other metals, which I call intermetallic relationships, to do with just our health and the planet's health. So lots and lots to discuss. And this is why I'm desperate to start getting my podcast sorted out. And I really do need to just get my arse into gear and get it organised. But hopefully what I've shared with these sort of 4 quick snippets is that the data's real. What we have is stuff falling on the UK, which has got a very close signature to atmospheric dust. However, there are some elements in there and some oxide in there that are very elevated, and I'd like to have some answers to where they have come from and what are they doing there and what harm are they doing to us. So that's it. Vibrations up, live life, love nature. Hope you enjoyed it. Bit different to what I normally do, isn't it? Thanks, folks.